Blackhawks fans, welcome into the Four Feathers podcast. It's Johnny Nani alongside my guys Tony on Tap and GM Ron Loose on Tap. How we doing today, gentlemen?
Doing as well as we can be, Johnny. We're all here in our best dressed black for today's season eulogy. It was a hell of a season indeed, but happy to be back on the microphone with you guys talking some Blackhawks hockey.
Likewise, I'm just out here reporting live on the scene with the dearly beloved. But guys, it's happy season eulogy. The departed, the faithful departed. Johnny, it's great to be here talking Blackhawks hockey with you.
Yeah, this is the season eulogy episode, an annual tradition here at Four Feathers Pod for your 2023 24 Chicago Blackhawks. So crack them and cheers. The little toast. Since the season has come to an end and there will be no official Blackhawks hockey until the fall. So drink that one down. That's always a weird statement to say at the end of every year, guys. So you go through a full 82-game grind, and there's ups, there's downs, there's good, there's bad. That's what we're here to discuss and talk about on this episode of the Four Feathers podcast. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, make sure you're subscribed over on YouTube, On Tap Sportsnet there. Give us a follow on the socials at Four Feathers Pod and at On Tap Sportsnet. And on Sportsnet.com is the place to go for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. Well, gentlemen, here lie the 2023-24 Chicago Blackhawks. They finish with the second worst record in the league, 23, 53-6, 52 points. However, that will get them a pick no lower than fourth overall, in good position for the future. This is kind of what a lot of people expected going into this year, another season like this. But it still wasn't without its trials and tribulations, injuries, absences, slumps. It was tough to get through at times, but then there were other bright, shining moments. Our shiny new toy, Connor Bedard, arrived on the scene. That was a thrill all year. I'm sure we've got much more on him, but your takeaways overall, in summary, from this season.
Gentlemen, it was a season that tested the patience of a lot of Hawks fans everywhere. I think everybody can attest to that. I think there was times where this team was just difficult to watch, and there was also still some fun though that occurred with it, and it's fun to see. Last year was a weird year because last year was a season of things being taken away, right? Max Domi and Athanasiou come in, but Domi's traded at the deadline. Obviously, Patrick Kane traded at the deadline. Jonathan Toews plays his last game as a Chicago Blackhawk. It was a more somber season, whereas this season, at least, although tough, was building back up in a better direction. Obviously, Connor Bedard joining the fold, certainly the glaring bright spot of this season. But some new leadership taking over, guys like Jason Dickinson and Nick Foligno stepping up as a part of this team. Guys like Alex Vlasic taking a massive step forward into becoming part of the future. And we got to see some of the young guys in a little bit of just a little bit of a tease toward the end of the season. Guys like Landon Slaggert, guys like Frank Nazar, who are expected to be some part of this future coming Blackhawks team. So, at least, although it was a season that was tough to watch at times, it was a season with understanding that there's good on the horizon. And this wasn't just a season where we were torn down to the studs mentally, physically, and emotionally, I think, as a fan base and as a team, right? It was a little different. So at least there were some glaring ups, but, certainly it was at times just tough to watch because they were meant to lose this year and they weren't meant to be good. So hopefully that changes starting this coming season and hopefully with a successful summer as well.
I can't echo what Ron said enough. For me, just overall thoughts, I thought this team was going to take a little bit of a step forward than they had last year. And that was probably purely on the back of Connor Bedard coming here and just the expectations. That said, this team really showed its depth and its ability to withstand major injuries very quickly into the season, because the amount of injuries that piled up early on really, really slowed, I think, some of that expectations, some of the excitement. And then ultimately the Connor Bedard injury, in my opinion, really sucked the life out of watching Chicago Blackhawks hockey for a good, what was that, month and a half period of time there?
5 weeks. Yep.
So, that was probably rock bottom what you're going to get with this Blackhawks organization. Now, I knock on wood when I say that, because I am a fan of another team that has proven to me that it can always be worse. But on the same, level of expectations that we talk about, you guys were spot on with what you had said in the season prediction episodes of where this team could be. I didn't expect bottom dweller. I didn't expect, second best odds for the first round pick. I thought that there would be a little bit more, dare I say, Luke Richardson magic, where we were able to find ways to win games that you didn't see this year, that you saw in the year before. So it was a bit of a mixed bag when it came to, the overall product, because as Ron said, there were plenty of reasons to be optimistic for the future of this team, but it also showed you just how far we have to go here and what they need to do to become a competitive team in the NHL going forward.
Yep. I think that's a good way to sum it up. I don't need to be lengthy with mine, but basically, Connor Bedard, you got your first taste of the true next franchise cornerstone. For so many years, we were so used to the Canes and Taves and Seabrook and Keith on the back end, Corey Crawford and net. You had pillars at every single position. Well, it's still going to take some time for these guys to filter in and figure out those roles, but 1C will be Connor Bedard, and he showed that this year. 3 Rookie of the Month awards. He is the front runner to win the Calder Trophy. Minnesota Wild fans, sit this one out. All right. That's on the positive side. You, like Ron had mentioned, I'm not going to rehash it, but with the leadership that stepped up and enough to earn A's on their jerseys and contracts to stay here for the future and help build this thing. That was another very positive thing. On the back end, just short, sweet, simple, maybe not too sweet, because watching development is painful and losing sucks. And there was so much of it this year. You had 53 in regulation and 6 in overtime. Think about how many nights that is, the afternoons for some of those matinee games, right? Just lamenting over it, because while it's all for the greater good in the end, at least that's what the hope is, down the road with the rebuild, you still live and die with the team every day. And going through that, it's painful. So that's what we're here to kind of reflect on in the season eulogy episode of Four Feathers podcast. So let's start at the top, man. Connor Bedard, he's got to be the headliner in all of this. I know there were other players that stepped up in this regard, but like I'd said, first taste of him this year, plenty of memorable highlight reel moments on this front. Guys, share your Connor Bedard takeaways. Maybe we can get into some favorite moments as well.
Tossing it over to me, Ron. I'll go for it. I think the obvious one is Connor Bedard with the Michigan right there. I believe that was Christmas Eve or the day before. So plenty of people at family parties tuned into the Hawks game. You see him pull off a highlight reel goal in that fashion in a division rival game. That is, establishing yourself in the NHL right there. But there were so many highlight moments that this kid provided throughout the entire season. I probably have to stick with the Michigan just because that's going to show up on highlight reels for probably the next 50, 60 years. Ron, yours.
I think for me, it has to be that Florida game. Like that, the first goal going top cheddar over Bobrovsky was the perfect summation, I think, of what he can become as he gets bigger and he fills into his frame. Like, I think there were times throughout the course of the season where fans just forget he's an 18-year-old kid. Like, he's going to get bigger. He's going to get better. We saw it with players like Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews and some of the best stars in the league. They came in and made a huge impact as young players, but they got better. And to showcase not only the forecheck that he did, but the just pure skill, that sniping ability that he has with that shot. That goal to me is was just the taste, right? That was just the tip of the iceberg of what type of player he can be on the offensive end, especially as he starts to fill out with his two-way game. So for me, that goal is the one that kind of sticks in my head and kind of replays over and over again. Obviously, the Michigan was incredible, but to me, that one would just because of the completeness of the play that happened before it as well. It just that one is the one where I go, that's the type of player that's going to be 1C for this franchise for a decade to come.
Yep, absolutely, Ron. You took some words right out of my mouth there because I was going to mention that Florida stretch right in November, and he started it off with a 4-point game at Tampa Bay on November 9th, and I believe that was his first multi-point game as well. So that was a early in the season sort of get the people riled up moment there, and then he follows it up with that. Ron, I agree with you. A lot of people, like I just said about him being the Calder Trophy front runner. Well, one of the things that people will point out on his resume that is not so great is the plus minus. And sure, you need to take into context the team that he was playing on, the style of game that he plays in that regard, but Ron, like you'd said, we didn't see, I don't think throughout the rest of the season, a whole lot of moments of Connor Bedard really hawking on the forecheck. But that one right there, when you just strip Dmitry Kulikov, stick lift, and then goes top shelf on Bobrovsky from that angle in the rock star zone, that's really, you think you put it perfectly, tip of the iceberg. So that was definitely one. But guys, you got to have a moment in front of the fans too. And sure, he dished plenty of assists. He had a few multi-point efforts at the UC. He scored in the home opener at Vegas that got the building jumping, made it the Madhouse on Madison, at least felt like for that moment there again. But man, the overtime winner after first game after Christmas, December 27th at home against Winnipeg. And you're looking at a Winnipeg team now that's playing really tough against the Colorado Avalanche in the first round of the playoffs, right? So you see how they finished the season, and to do that against a team of that caliber in front of the home fans in overtime, ending it like that. And you just got some great, long-term images of Connor Bedard, because I believe that was the one with the hands out celly. There were some good cellies along the way too. One staring down the glass at Florida after that goal that we had talked about. But plenty of great memories on the Connor Bedard front. But, still work to be done, as Ron said, still growing as a player. But overall, you have to be satisfied with looking at the future of your franchise on display in year one of this, sort of process here. So, guys,
Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong. The goal that you brought up is the one where afterwards he spoke to the fans. I think this was one of the first times that he was handed a microphone in front of the UC. Yes. And, said that he loved playing here. And that sort of came at a time where most of hockey Twitter was sitting there, or Hockey X, whatever we want to call it, saying that, Bedard's going to leave. Some of the Corey Perry things that were going on at the time as well. And then you hear him say, like, I like being in Chicago. I thought that was a huge moment. And I got goosebumps when you started bringing that all back to me, because it started to flood back.
Right. Yeah. It's an important moment. These are, the types of things that obviously we're sitting here and reminiscing on them, but there'll be the types of things like that dissuade random online, rumors, no matter how untrue they may be, right? Because Vancouver fans, all year they said he wants to come home and play there, right? Yeah, sure. That's nice that the Canucks are in the playoffs now, but I don't think the Blackhawks are letting Connor Bedard walk ever. So, that kind of stuff is laying the seeds of that, Tony. I agree. Another player that I think was the second brightest spot of the season, guys, Alex Vlasic. He established himself as a true blue line presence, a shutdown defenseman. I think he's a great skater, and he's got even more in the bag offensively. But what'd you see from big number 72 on the blue line?
I mean, Alex Vlasic was arguably one of my favorite things about this team this year. Obviously, taking away number 98, because that's the easy answer. It has to be Alex Vlasic and what he's become. And I think a large part of that, too, is because we watched for countless years as this Blackhawks team failed to develop blue liners. Right. I mean, we can just go down the list of names of the Henry Jokiharus and the Ian Mitchells, and, the list goes on and on of these guys, Adam Boqvist, that just were failed development projects under the Stan Bowman era. And it's been the complete opposite so far from what we've seen under the Kyle Davidson era. You have a guy like Alex Vlasic who spent the entire 2022 season in Rockford, which was, in hindsight now, absolutely the right move, playing those number one, top guy minutes, playing every situation possible. And he became a calming presence. And again, he played on the top line this year with Seth Jones on that top pairing. They were the best two defensemen for this Blackhawks team throughout the entire course of the season. They played the most minutes. He was leaned on in the most critical situations from a defensive standpoint. You know, it's reassuring knowing now that they have that stable, big, just defensive stalwart on the blue line. That's a youngster that's going to be here for a long time. And you know, guys, I think something that gets severely understated, and I think it's going to continue to gain some momentum as this team gets better. He's a hometown kid. He's a Chicago boy. That's the best part of it at the end of the day. This is one of your guys that grew up in your backyard, probably growing up watching the same great Blackhawks teams that we all did. And he's now an NHLer, and he's now playing for his hometown franchise. He's going
Just
to be
chime in on that real quick, Ron. You talk about the hometown connection. Cool Four Feathers tidbit. I sat next to his family during 2019 prospect scrimmage. There you go.
There you go.
Good people.
And they are, you know, and he talks about going home on off days and things like that. I think his development is the key as well to why people should begin to trust what Kyle Davidson is doing, because Alex Vlasic is the first success story, especially on the blue line. I think you saw a little bit of it at the end of the year with a guy like Ethan Del Mastro as well, and they've kind of applied that same logic to him. He was an AHL All-Star this year. They're going to continue to develop some blue liners and get some guys in there to start complimenting on the blue line. But Alex Vlasic is the first successful experiment that we've seen from this new regime. He was sensational, and he's going to be that calming defensive influence for years and years to come for these Blackhawks.
That gives you hope for the likes of Ethan Del Mastro and Nolan Allen, right? I think that's what really,
Absolutely.
you know, it's obviously they're their own players, but it gives you a refreshed sense of, okay, this isn't the same old like we've seen in defensive development.
I think it makes the same thing for a guy like Kevin Korchinski as well. I mean, look at him. He played, you know, over 70 games as an 18-year-old in the NHL and held his own. I mean, yeah, he had his rookie moments, and he didn't
think he was going to stay up here all season.
No, and I think he proved a lot of people wrong, and I think a lot of that is credit into some of the development of what this Blackhawks, you know, new regime is telling these guys from a developmental standpoint. So, it's the first pillar in what should be hopefully a lot of successful, you know, development stories for the Blackhawks now moving forward. But Alex Vlasic, he's also probably the one name that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks that needs some new figures attached to his name, because he is technically a restricted free agent and he needs a new contract. But I don't, just like Connor Bedard, I don't believe Kyle Davidson lets him out of Chicago.
Fair enough, Ron. I don't have much to add to that. I think you summed up Vlasic very well. I will just add to this because it has nothing to do with his on-ice ability, but his off-ice ability is he provides Four Feathers with some great meme usage with the Vlasic Pickles memes that we had created. So if he's got that going for him, on top of everything Ron just said. So that's all I've got to add.
I like that, Tony, because that's something to look forward to. I had mentioned, I think there's more in the bag offensively, and he said that he wants to work on his shot over this offseason. So hopefully that leads to more goals. I know it's, you know, defenseman, you're not going to be racking up the same totals like forward is. However, more goals will provide us with more opportunities to get the Vlasic bread and butter snipes pickles meme out there. So I look forward to that with Alex Vlasic, assuming they get a contract done. See no reason why they shouldn't. That'll just be a GM Ron thing. Keep an eye on over at OnTapSportsNet.com this offseason as we go on. There were other bright spots throughout the season, guys. Philip Kurashev with the breakout, playing alongside Connor Bedard. That was very nice to see. You had Peter Mrazek finally staying healthy, playing well, earned himself a contract. That's all good stuff. But this is a eulogy, and we would be remiss if we didn't address the fallen and what could have been with Taylor Hall all season, man. Gone too soon in the season. Luckily, he'll be back. He's on a 2-year deal, so he will be back. But I just want to have a little toast to Taylor Hall. He was zapped, you know, just mid-November, and then he had to go on the shelf with that torn ACL. So that's one of many injuries that, guys. Tony, you talked about some of the injuries that they weathered here. What walks through it and some of the struggles that you know came about because of these ailments?
I mean, Hall, number one, I mean, that was, as you were just mentioning, that's a guy that should have been there with Bedard on the top line all season. So if we're picking one that really impacted, potential developments and different things that we could have seen. Hey, look at the plus minus you just mentioned on Bedard, the first thing that everybody wants to go to. I think that looks a little different if you're skating on a top line with Taylor Hall all season. Bedard obviously missed some time with the jaw. I will say this. Sometimes I do get a little bit nervous with Connor Bedard skating around sort of recklessly through a zone. And this is what can happen. It's hockey. People are going to knock you down. And sometimes that results in injuries. If you want to look at, what the impact of that was, that's a whole 5 weeks of development missed at the NHL level for an 18-year-old superstar. And it also sort of sucked the life out of the Chicago Blackhawks. I mentioned that earlier. Andreas Athanasiou, that's another guy who, on the offensive side of this thing can really drive plays. And, the Blackhawks took a chance bringing him back here was that a 2-year deal, GM Ron, that was? That's basically a wasted year of Andreas Athanasiou. And I think that, when you add the three of those guys just on the forward front together, there's some games that you lost because they weren't in your lineup. But when you flip it over to the defensive side, Seth Jones missed a significant portion of the year dealing with injuries as well. And that's a guy that I'll leave Ron to sort of talk more about Seth Jones and his season. But, he's your number one defender, in my opinion. You can't teach size. He's also your veteran guy back there alongside Connor Murphy, who also missed time. So you're relying on so many young guys all at once. Things are bound to go wrong. This is outside of Bedard. You list all these names. These are the veterans. These are the veteran core guys that are here. You want to add Corey Perry in to that mix as well as players who started the season. That's your leadership. That's your on ice leadership right there. Minus a few names here and there. You can probably throw Tyler Johnson in there as well, but really long term, the only one that stayed healthy for a significant portion of the season, he even missed some time, was Nick Foligno. So what could you really expect when you've got – go ahead, Johnny.
Jason Dickinson was your Iron Man. He's the only one to play all games, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good from an injury standpoint. And injuries are to be expected, but when you get dealt that many bad cards, it's really hard to win a hand of poker or win an NHL hockey game.
Yeah, not much else to add, but it really was, when you look at the injuries, it just was truly like the worst case scenario. I think we all sat here before the season and said, hey, best case scenario, this team is at least competitive. They're probably still not a playoff team, but they give you some surprise wins. And we're sitting here maybe staring down the barrel of the 10th or 11th pick in the NHL draft, not a top 4 selection like they are right now. But when every single one of your big hitters misses significant time, including your prize franchise player in Connor Bedard, it's hard to win hockey games. And like you mentioned, Johnny, only one player on this team playing all 82 games, and that is Jason Dickinson. And at least that was a bright spot because he set career highs in goals and points, and he was tied for your team lead in goals for the season with Connor Bedard. So I think it really was truly just the worst case scenario in terms of who got hurt. And ideally, between the youth injection of guys like Nazar and Slaggert coming into next season, and ideally some additions in terms of veteran, players, whether that's, 2-year guys in free agency or maybe, short-term contracts via trade type players, that should help going forward. That if there is a significant injury to one of your quote unquote big guns, there's a lot more behind them that will, help make up for that lost, production, whether it's offensively or defensively. But it really was just the worst case scenario this season for the Blackhawks in terms of the who's who of who got hurt and for how long.
Right, and then you're thrusting some of the younger guys in there. Maybe Wyatt Kaiser played a few more games at the NHL level than they wanted. Maybe they envisioned more of a Vlasic program. I know he did start on the opening night roster, but you just never know if they stay healthy in that regard there completely on the back end. I don't have to go and pick up the Jacob Megnas of the world. Like if the injuries don't get to that point, right, then maybe he's on a little bit of a more, like I said, Alex Vlasic, Rockford type plan there. So thrusting younger guys into roles and having to, then go and pick off the scrap heap of the NHL, right? They made a few waiver claims this year. So that just tells you how the injuries impacted this team. All right, guys, and on ice, one big piece that was expected to do a lot this year. I've harped on it all season here. People are probably sick of it, especially if you're a defender of this man. But Lukas Reichel had an objectively bad season. There's no way to sugarcoat it. You can get into me with the nuance. I will entertain it, but you cannot tell me that 16 points, 5 goals, 11 assists over 65 games is anything other than an objectively bad season for Lukas Reichel. And I think the worst part about it was a lot of that stemmed from confidence issues, and it was not the step in the development that they were envisioning for him. I understand that development isn't linear. Not everybody's going to go on the smooth track up right to the top of the roller coaster. However, if this is a guy, touted as 2C essentially before the season, and sure, get bumped off of that, but to have the, you see the flashes of it, and unfortunately that's all we were able to take away as the positives for Lukas Reichel. It took a stint in Rockford and then come back, and then the flashes, and then the last game of the year, did you see that awesome poke through the neutral zone that he made and speed into the net and scored the breakaway goal? That was great. Where was that in game 12 instead of 82, right? That's the kind of thing that really disappointed me about Lukas Reichel this year. So that's just something that we have to reflect on here. Maybe in the Blackhawks' favor, that means a lesser dollar amount this offseason. Not really short of cap space, GM Ron, but that's about the only thing that you can look at it in terms of a positive for the Blackhawks end. But I think they'd rather just have him ball out and had him as a restricted free agent anyway. So that's going to take some, and we'll have an opportunity with Rockford coming up here, but that's just a concern going forward that this season left me with.
And certainly a fair concern, again, especially because looking at the beginning of the season, right, we knew guys like Vlasic were going to get a look this year at, we thought probably third pairing, maybe second pairing time, maybe first pairing, because we thought that top spot next to Seth Jones was going to be kind of rotational all year. It really was the Connor Bedard's Batman who's going to be Robin. And a lot of people thought Robin was going to become Lukas Reichel. And, I think at least one thing learned was he's probably not a center at the NHL level. I think the defensive responsibility of the position just doesn't suit his game at the highest level. And to your point, Johnny, right? We saw some of those flashes, but they weren't consistent flashes. And I think that's something that he's going to have to take to the bank. I think the Blackhawks have no problem giving him a second contract. I think they've seen enough to give him probably something in that lower dollar value. I would say a really good benchmark for what he probably gets this offseason is a Brandon Hagel contract. For those that might recall, it was a 3-year deal at about $1.5 million per season. Might not get the same term. I don't know if, they want to have the extra year of term. Maybe they do, because otherwise you're going to have everybody and their brother coming up at the same time in terms of contracts, like Nazar and Bedard. But I could see kind of that 3-year deal somewhere in that $4.5 to $5 million range, where they just say, hey, go out there, go be better this year. And he's probably going to be a middle 6 winger next year rather than coming in with those expectations of being a 2C. But agreed, Johnny, I think that was another reason why this team didn't succeed as much, because a lot of people thought Lukas Reichel was going to come out, and based on what he showed at the end of the prior season, maybe he was going to be a 45 point player in his second full year at the NHL. I guess really technically first full season at the NHL level. Instead, struggled mightily, was, often a fourth line player, sometimes even a healthy scratch. So, he's going to get another opportunity because he's got first round draft capital attached to him, whether, people like it or not. But at the end of the day, he's got a lot of work to do and a lot to prove to be, again, a staple part of the future of the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yep, absolutely. I want to wrap up Lukas Reichel and get to another position that we expected some development from, and that's the goalie spot. So we got to hand it over to our guy, Tony, on this front. And Arvid Soderblom did not take the step that he needed. If anything, it seemed like he took a step back this year, and it led to Peter Mrazek having to carry the load and also getting a contract extension because they didn't feel comfortable for the future with Arvid Soderblom slotting into 1A. So to say, Tony.
Yeah, and that's what you wanted, was Arvid Soderblom to sort of take that leap this year. And goaltending is really going to be a problem going forward here until somebody solidifies themselves as a legitimate number one. Now, Peter Mrazek had to carry most of the load. I think you guys would agree with it, but I don't know if there was so much to write home about and say like he had a great season. He had a healthy season. He did much better than what his expectations were, but there were still times where Peter Mrazek looked overmatched. And, you know, from the goaltending perspective, you need your goalies to steal some games. Arvid Soderblom didn't do that, I don't think, once all year. Finishes the year with an .879 save percentage, career .883. That's in 50 games played. I don't know the exact magic number, but like, how long do you ride out Arvid Soderblom and say, like, we know what we have here now? I think Blackhawks fans wanted that. I wanted them to address that. Thought we might see some Jackson Stauber this year, thought we might see them mix it up a little bit, but they rode with Soderblom the whole entire season. Whereas last year we saw a lot of goaltending injuries and a little bit of fluctuation. This year was just steady Peter Mrazek. And then when they had to play Arvid Soderblom because you were on 3 games in 5 days or whatever, you get that start. And it got to the point where we had to create a meme with this guy's body made of fucking cheese, because that's what it felt like every time he was in net, is just abysmal goaltending play. And we're not talking about, you know, being overmatched or, you know, we can lend some credence to the defense not being all that great. I think you guys would agree. There were shots that should have just been stopped. Rebound control was an issue, and it never really developed at all. And, you know, in the same sense, I guess the last start of the year, he had a couple of good periods in the first 2 periods. And I think I sent a post about it on X as well, Johnny, when you were talking about Lukas Reichel scoring that goal. Like, here's to looking at you, Arvid Soderblom, too, because you need to end the year on a positive note. Well, you know, we all know what happened there. So this was probably the most abysmal year from a goaltending standpoint to watch the Chicago Blackhawks. Not to take away anything that Peter Mrazek did, because he stood on his head a couple of times, but it wasn't enough to get the job done by any stretch of the imagination. This is an area of concern. I'm worried personally about the development and the ability that it's going to take to get the goaltending up to snuff to be ready for what I think should be a more accelerated rebuild. You know, now that Connor Bedard's in the fold, and they've got an offseason to address this. Really curious to see what happens, because this can't be the same goaltending tandem that you send out there next year hoping for development to take place, alongside also telling the fans in your postseason press conference that it's time to take the next step.
So, Ron, I want to hand this over to you.
You're trying to say is, do you think they should get a new goalie?
I think they should get a new goalie. But
Ron, I was going to hand it over to GM Ron and say, unfortunately, Arvid Soderblom didn't do enough to solidify himself. So it opens the question now as we enter the offseason, GM Ron's, wheelhouse here. Do they go and sign another veteran type goalie that's out there? Because no matter what's happening with Arvid Soderblom, that is not reason to rush Drew Commesso up to the show yet.
Agreed. I think Drew Commesso needs another full season in Rockford. I would make the argument that Arvid Soderblom was rushed to the NHL. And I know, he still was getting his first taste of NHL action within the Stan Bowman era. Tony, I think you'll like to hear this. I think we could see a bigger dose of a guy like Jackson Stauber next year, because he had a really nice year in Rockford this season. So maybe that's another avenue that
he needs a new contract too.
He does, and I think he's going to get one. I really do believe that he will be in the fold come next season. But guys, I mean, is that cheaping out though, Ron? Is that cheaping out and doing the same thing over again here that we just did with Arvid Soderblom? That's what I'm just throwing it out there as a question. Yeah,
it was a very small sample size, but I'd argue that Jackson Stauber has flashed more at the NHL level. Sure, it might have felt like a flash in the pan, but at some point, performance has got to dictate it, right?
Yeah,
who gets the opportunities.
100%. And I think there's a world where a guy like Stauber gets a reasonable look. And, again, you got 2 more years of Comesso under the contract that he's currently under, but with the arbitration and with him still being a younger player, I don't see why Stauber doesn't get another look. Guyon's probably not going to be ready for even AHL action for at least another 2 seasons. So, I could see a world where that's the case, where they go ahead and they say, hey, Stauber, you're going to get a decent dose of things. But guys, there is quite a healthy market for that type of goalie that the Blackhawks would be looking for. To come in and effectively complement a guy like Mrazek this coming season, depending on what age group you're looking. And if you're looking for a guy who has played a lot of games, I mean, Cam Talbot had a really good year for the Kings this year. He's certainly an option. Ilya Samsonov is a goaltender that will be a free agent. Alex Nedeljkovic, Kaapo Kakkonen. So there's some decent names out there. But guys, dare I say, while we're on the topic of goaltender, we know Kyle Davidson has this cupboard of talent and draft picks. There's teams in the NHL that are going to have a lot of trouble keeping players. He's a restricted free agent this year. But would you call the Boston Bruins and trade maybe a future second, first, or maybe even a first for a guy like Jeremy Swayman, who's only 25 years old, has shown he can be an elite goaltender in the NHL? And maybe that accelerates the rebuild even further when you do have that brick wall in net to complement a growing blue line and an up-and-coming forward group. I think that is something.
I just heard some kicking in the casket behind me.
I think that's something that needs to be just kept in the back of our minds. I'm not going to sit here and say that, bar none, for sure, that he's going to go out and get the job done. And by he, I mean Kyle Davidson. But, I mean, he took a $3.47 million deal to stay with Boston this season, that being Swayman. But, again, he's 25 years old. They still have another year of Linus Ullmark as the number one goaltender at $5 million. And they've got their own cap issues they got to worry about with guys like Matt Grzelcyk being due a new deal. And, and some of these other guys, who's to say that maybe they would be willing to listen for the right price for a guy like Jeremy Swayman?
I'll just say, I'm not saying anything is going to happen. And we're still, playoffs are just starting, right? So we won't know much until the summer. Playoffs? They could use the draft capital, though. They could use the draft capital. I'll tell you that right now. They've been depleted for years of just high finishes in where they are making playoffs every year, and trades that they made when they send out some of that capital out there. And it's tough to pay all of those guys at once. So like you said, with other guys do extensions, well, it's going to be.
Johnny, I mean, think about this, right? You say that draft capital being depleted. As it stands right now, the Boston Bruins don't have a pick in this year's draft until the 4th round. Maybe
what I'm talking about.
Maybe Kyle Davidson's willing to give up one of his 3 second rounders this year, or maybe even that, first round pick in the future that currently belongs to the Toronto Maple Leafs, unless maybe even this year, if you don't like what happens when you get to inevitably what's probably going to be about pick 20 for that second first round pick for the Chicago Blackhawks, which statistically, guys picked in that range have the same odds of making it in the NHL as a guy picked in the 3rd round. Would you give up the second first round pick to secure Jeremy Swayman to a long-term deal to be your goaltender of the future?
Ron, at this point, you've got to find ways to accelerate the rebuild. And if this is the Nostra Loose that's been missing from all of your dinger picks on Cubs on Tap, this is worth it right here. Just keep putting that energy into something like that. I'm not saying that that's going to be the exact scenario, but you're able to pick this one apart. It sounds great to me. I like it.
Right. And just with question marks, the thing is, it'd be, an ideal world, right? All your prospects pan out. But we're talking about this. Why? How did we start this discussion? Arvid Soderblom is not asserting himself. But while Drew Comesso is a nice draft pick there, nothing's guaranteed there. And goalies are just such a, development track of their own. Who knows if, even another year in Rockford's enough, time for when he's ready for when this team is taking steps forward, or at least that's what Kyle Davidson says it is time to do here. So all interesting stuff posed by GM Ron. Tune into Four Feathers all summer and check out ontapsportsnet.com for more on that front. But we're here for the season eulogy, guys. So I want to bring it back. Fond memories, favorite memories of this team from this year. I know we mentioned a few of them in the Bedard discussion to open this thing up, but we put it out there during the final intermission of the season, right? And we got some great replies from our awesome followers over on X at Four Feathers Pod there. But I just want to, rifle through some of these. We talked about some of the top Bedard moments, but man, off the top of my head, Ron, I can remember one that you were at, right? Black Friday. Tell me about that. What an experience.
Johnny, I'm still chasing that adrenaline high after that goal was scored by Kevin Korchinski. That was the one night this season that I think probably outside of the Chris Chelios, Patrick Kane night, that truly felt like the old barn, right? Like it had that energy of the Madhouse on Madison that has been missing for so many years.
Highest attended game of the season.
I believe it was
in Ben Pope's little tracker that he has,
Yeah. And I mean, it felt like it. I mean, as soon as that puck went in the net, that place exploded. And I think that contributed to why it was such a serene experience. And, it was cool because it was the day that the kids out there in overtime get the game-winning goal. Bedard assisted on it, I believe, as did Kurashev. And then you had the Jason Dickinson, how are you now, hat trick that game as well. And it was a battle from behind against one of the best teams in the NHL who they swept the season series with in the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yeah, I mean, what better way to take in the American Thanksgiving holiday than, going to a 2:00 in the afternoon Blackhawks game the following day after you've stuffed your face with turkey, only to potentially regurgitate it all, celebrating a Korchinski goal. It was a beautiful day. It was probably one of my fondest memories, but I certainly don't want to steal the thunder because there's another great one that I know Tony had on his mind when it came to this exact question.
To close that one out, just insert the Squidward meme, future, right? And that's what that brings up with the Korchinski, Kurashev, Bedard connection on that one. So Tony, tell us about, what.
Well, I know that we all want to talk about the Chelios night, Patrick Kane Day, but before we get there, I've got a little detour stop. I don't know if this counts as part of this season, but I was fortunate enough to head down to Nashville for the NHL draft. And I thought the Blackhawks put on an incredible event for season ticket holders and those who made the trip down to Nashville to witness them draft the future of this organization, Connor Bedard. So I do have to say that was probably up there, maybe, 1A for me, just being able to go down there and witness the Chelsea Dagger playing on repeat over Broadway in Nashville was fantastic. I have to give them that. Johnny, you got a question on that?
I was just going to say, if this is a eulogy, what we do at the end of the year, that was like the celebration of life to begin it, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. It was a great time. Obviously there was no hockey being played, but really brought hockey to the summer for me a little bit. And it got me juiced up for this year. That said, the Chris Chelios Day event, Patrick Kane returning, so much anticipation for a lot of different things in Blackhawks history that were being celebrated that day. It wasn't just, a banner or a jersey going up into the rafters. You had the franchise cornerstone now playing for, I don't know if we still consider them our rivals. I do personally. I've heard the argument that because they're not in the same conference as us anymore, that the Detroit rivalry is over. I'm still a big firm believer in Detroit sucks. I know Johnny is as well, and our guy Pat Comiskey. Ron, I don't know where you fall on that spectrum, but to have Patrick Kane, a franchise icon, come back and play in this game that you're retiring one of my long Hawks heroes in Chris Chelios, the first Blackhawks sweater that I ever owned, and the captain of a team I was watching growing up, who went to Detroit himself. It felt like everything just met right there in the Blackhawks universe. It was, I grew up in the 90s, so it was a lot of 90s nostalgia, brought me back to my childhood, Chris Chelios, all the highlights that were part of that. And then the second era that I consider in my Blackhawks life would be the Cup years. Patrick Kane, he's a huge part of that. And to see him come back here, you've got a bunch of the guys from the 90s teams. You had hockey royalty, Wayne Gretzky's in the building. That atmosphere is really hard to replicate outside of something like a Stanley Cup final. So everything culminated with, Patrick Kane scoring the game-winning goal in overtime, the ovations that he got in the middle of the game. This day was a movie, Johnny, as you like to say sometimes.
Cinematic.
That day was absolute. Yeah, it was cinema, man. It was beautiful. And to get there and be a part of that in person, one that I will never forget. Just everything you could have wanted out of a hockey game that the Blackhawks lose in to who I consider still a rival was still delivered on that day. And, it's got to be down there, probably just under the Field of Dreams game that I got to attend in terms of sporting events. But that is probably, a 1A of sporting events that I've attended in my lifetime.
Yeah, for sure, guys. Those are, kind of big milestone moments, and especially with the fan experience, which is great. Just a few others that we got from this replies. One that I had forgotten, but there was someone mentioned the Nick Foligno Fight Club, and there was a fight where I forget who it was on Arizona, but he absolutely clocked him. There's a great still that we have over on Four Feathers Pod of him just, giving the business.
Is that the one he broke
So
his pinky on?
No, because that was in the New Jersey game after Bedard got injured. It was an Arizona game at a different. I was Liam O'Brien, I want to say. He was fighting from Arizona, but that was a good memory. There were plenty of other good ones that we had in there. Connor Bedard's return from injury, he had a little point surge after that. It kind of injected some life back into the building. That was all good stuff. There was that Tommy Hawk's birthday, the animated game. I thought that was kind of hilarious from the watching standpoint. And they also beat a really good team that is also playing in the Cup playoffs right now in the Dallas Stars on that day. And
Johnny, I was at the arena for the Tommy Hawk's birthday party. And I've got to say the experience out of the arena seems much different because we didn't get much of the animation stuff there. Would you consider that a top moment? I want you to expand on it. I don't think we've talked much about Tommy Hawk's birthday.
Yeah, memorable for sure. I mean, it's great for the kids, right? If you're trying to reach a younger, demographic, and they made multiple efforts on that front with those matinee games and doing the best day ever. And the focus was on the next generation. Well, this one, they made it animated, and you've seen this. I think ESPN, ABC started it with the Big City Greens games a couple of years ago. Kevin Weeks and whatever on the commentary, and they made the animation like that. I thought, it was interesting because I had the regular feed up, and then I pulled up a monitor just to see what it was all about and the animation on there. Like I said, it was memorable. And that was their last win of the season, guys. It's unfortunate that they didn't get one after that, but that is something that I definitely remember for that reason. But one that we talk about a lot about the fan, our experiences, one that I think was huge for the locker room that maybe you didn't even know about if you didn't watch the belt videos after the game, or the chain. That's what they had, the chain this year, right? When they gave away the chain for the player of the game within the locker room. If you'd noticed when they had that run of games against the Kings, the Ducks, the Sharks, all in succession, they played them at home basically for, what felt like a series, and then on the road going out west for like what felt like a series. This was in like mid to late March, and they were down 4-0 entering the third period at San Jose on March 23rd. They came back, won that game in overtime. 2-point night for Connor Bedard. Ryan Donato, I want to say, had a 3-point game in that one run. We had talked about that on the latest installment of Four Feathers podcast, but that was their California Cup championship. And while you can't simulate playoff hockey, right? It was better than just going through the motions of the season and just playing it out, right? They had to give themselves something to work for in that regard. And like I said, it's not going to be publicized. It's not like a huge thing that everybody knows about it. There's no California Cup designation on the schedule that you're going to see there. But I remember just seeing those reaction videos in there. And that's the kind of stuff that builds the culture, TWTW, right, that we talk about here on the show. And it sucks because you want to just talk about winning games in general, right, and getting to the actual Stanley Cup playoffs. But what are you going to do when you're already eliminated at that point, right? So I was happy with what they did there, and it was an exhilarating comeback, and I was, nice and sauced up for it. So late night game, good to see that one. So those are just some memories there. Feel free to drop us over at Four Feathers Pod on X. Let us know what your favorite memory from this 2023-24 Blackhawks season was. All right, cue up my favorite artist, Avicii. It's For a Better Day, guys. All of this development, painful losses that we've gone through is hopefully now leading us on the uphill track of this rebuild. And Kyle Davidson said as much in his post-season remarks just before we're recording this season eulogy episode. You think this is it? Hopefully last year of tanking, and it's time to take a step forward next year. How do they do it?
Well, another year of growth will certainly be a huge part of that. A healthy year will also certainly be a part of that. And gentlemen, it's going to come down to what they do this summer. I think they do need to make a few strategic additions this summer to really turn this thing and start this thing moving forward. You know, not all the kids are going to be ready next year to make a huge impact. A few of them might be, truly, right? Nazar, Slaggert, some of those kind of guys. But there's going to be a lot of guys in Rockford that still need a year or two of seasoning as well before they really can make any kind of contributions at the NHL level. So I think a strategic addition or two is going to be required this summer. And as the tagline says, GM Ron, I'm very excited to see what that is and kind of hypothesize on it as it comes, when Christmas morning arrives on July 1st and NHL free agency opens, because that is truly my favorite day of the year, waking up and knowing that the numbers and contracts will be flying all day long. And I expect the Blackhawks to be at least slightly active, especially more active than a year ago when Ryan Donato was their only signing that they made. So a development of guys you already have, but some strategic additions as well is what it's going to take to make Kyle Davidson's words come true.
I want more from you, Ron. I want to know, your off-season plans. I don't know if this is the right medium to give all those, but an off-season plan from GM Ron would really help me understand how you think we can get this team back to competitive nature. I think one of the major things is it goes back to that goaltending. You're going to see some guys take some step forward. You're going to see some guys sort of frustrate you. One name that we didn't really talk about throughout the show was Taylor Radish. Like, that's a guy that also took a step back this season. So, you can't always.
He's gone in my mind. That's just
you can't always count, all your eggs before they hatch. But I think in terms of getting this thing back together, you're going to have to do something a little bit daring. I don't know what it is, if it comes at the goaltending position, if it comes at acquiring another forward defenseman, where it is. There's got to be some way outside of just we're going to rely on the development of everyone and who we have in-house to get this job done and start to push that gas pedal down just a little bit further. I don't know where that's going to come from, but I would love to see Davidson get a little bit aggressive this offseason. I know that's not going to come with what I truly want, and Ron and I have gone toe-to-toe on this all season long, which is like bring in top-tier talent, because there is salary cap concerns when you've got to make, contract obligations to a bunch of guys that are all going to come up at once, as Ron sort of mentioned. But get a little aggressive. Get another veteran name in here, or a guy that's, younger on that 25, 26 age range that you can invest in long-term and feel comfortable giving him something, whether that's via trade or free agency. I don't know, but be aggressive, I think is sort of the mantra I want to see. I don't want nothing really developed this offseason, because I can see that taking place, Johnny. I don't know about you, but the press conferences when we come into the beginning of the year, we tried, the market just wasn't there. It's time to start to make your own destiny.
That's why that second option that you just mentioned there, I think trade could be the dark horse that, gets you some of those pieces that actually lead to that next step next season, as Kyle Davidson wishes for this team. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. Keep an eye on GM Ron there. He's got his handle for the X Machine down there, and obviously he's over at ontapsportsnet.com. All right, guys, we get down to our final, end of this season eulogy for Four Feathers podcast. Let's do our normal segments here and ruffle some feathers. Looks like Ron's got us let off on this one.
This is the last year, folks, that you can be down on this Blackhawks team. I really do think that they're going to be really fun to watch next year. I think they're going to have a lot of encouraging things. Do I think they're going to be a playoff team? No, but I think they'll be dangerously close. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. I really do. Another growth year out of Connor Bedard, another growth year out of Alex Vlasic, another growth year out of some of these other guys that we got tastes of this year: Frank Nazar, Landon Slaggert, Ethan Del Mastro, etc. It's going to be a lot of fun. Philip Kurashev has proved that he is a 50-point player on a very bad hockey team. That's hard to do, folks. It's hard to be a good scorer on a bad hockey team. So I'm going to ruffle the feathers and say, hey, it's really easy to come into, thinking next year is going to be more the same and have low expectations. But I think it's okay to have some high expectations for this team because they're starting to build the foundation. The foundation is almost set. That concrete's starting to fucking dry already. It's time to start having some real expectations for this team moving forward. I agree. I don't think they're going to go out in free agency and spend big because that's where, you get yourself into those cap issues with guys like Bedard and others needing to be paid here in a few years. But Tony, I think you might be onto something with the trade route. I certainly think they can poach some of these teams that might be in a little bit of cap concern where you say, hey, We'll take your cap burden off your books for these next 2 years so you can continue to make cup runs. But we want that really good young player that you have there too. And maybe that's a guy that becomes part of the building blocks for the future. We saw it happen in Carolina when the Blackhawks shipped Brian Bickle out of town with Teuvo Teravainen. Maybe the Blackhawks and Karma turns around and gives them something like that. So stop being low on this team. It's the last time we can do so here in our all black of the season eulogy.
All right, I think that rolls it into Salt Shaker. Tony,
Johnny, I've got one ruffle the feathers real quick. I know he didn't list it in here, but if Ron wants to say that this is the last year that you can be down on this team, it also becomes Luke Richardson evaluation for real standpoint time. I don't know about you guys, but I've loved what Luke Richardson's done. I think he's been an excellent coach through this rebuild. But let's see how he handles a winning team. I think it's a lot easier, and I'm not saying this because I'm down on Luke Richardson at all. It's a lot easier to have low expectations. It's going to raise the bar not only for the team, but the coaching staff as well, and everybody should adjust those expectations accordingly.
Right. Fair point. All right, let's move it into Salt Shaker because this ruffled some feathers. And over at ontapsportsnet.com, our enforcer, Pat Comiskey, wrote a little something about just pondering, could a Patrick Kane Blackhawks reunion be in the cards this summer? And some people have completely closed the door on it. Some believe Kyle Davidson has done so as well. But I think he made some cogent points in there. And one of them that was when you look at the routes that both parties will go down this summer, you could make the argument that they would lead to one another there. Some people don't want to hear that, but that's where we are. So the Salt Shaker came out on that one on quite a few occasions there. So that was your guys' thoughts. Open to it.
Hey, I mean, I know people don't want to hear this. I think it'd be really cool to see Patrick Kane end his career in Chicago in the Indian head sweater. I think it would be the perfect send off. I don't know if that's a 3-4 year deal. I think that's a little too much term to just hand Patrick Kane at this juncture. The talk about his defense not being there, all these other things. Fine, understand it from a hockey perspective.
Still nearly point per game this year. I think he's one off that pace. So
when you're talking about, we need to add, more depth to this forward group, you're not looking at Patrick Kane to come in here and be the same Patrick Kane he was through the cup runs. You're looking at an established veteran who can skate with a guy like Connor Bedard if you needed to on the power play, and also knows the ins and outs of the city of Chicago fairly well. I believe he still owns a home here. I don't know. It seems in my opinion, it seems too perfect of a union that you can have here. There's a lot of people who want to say this is Connor Bedard City now. That's fine. Patrick Kane can also come serve a good purpose. And who's to say in 3 years he's not cup chasing again if he puts in some time here? I think everybody wants to, write that off as a we're not, but they're talking about turning the page, right? They're talking about turning the page and making this a more competitive team. I think he sort of falls in the price range. I don't know, Ron. I'm not the GM like you are, but I I could see where he falls in the price range a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. I don't have much else to add, Tony. I think you nailed it perfectly. I think a lot of people would certainly like to see it. It's just going to come down to what the philosophy is of this front office and what they are believing in terms of Patrick Kane and the Chicago Blackhawks. But I think if there's the openness in the front office, I think there's certainly the openness with the player. And I certainly don't think the fan base would be upset about it by any means. So
I think there are some fans that'd be upset about it.
Yeah, maybe, but I think there'd be a lot more that'd be excited to see 88 back than there would be salty about it.
Bold statement. If you don't explore this for the reason of, we don't want to piss off those certain group of fans, you're making the wrong decision from a front office standpoint.
Right.
Agreed.
I would predict that I don't think it's going to happen. I think he'll sign elsewhere, but I would be open to it as well. So that's my final thoughts on that there. All right. Stick taps for the final time for this season. I will go first. Start off with Peter Mrazek. Hey, made most of these games watchable. He stole a few of them in there, and good for him staying healthy finally. That was always a big issue with the groin that he had in years past. And hey, it even earned him a 2-year contract extension. So that means the Family Guy memes can continue on my end. So you guys know I'm thrilled about that. Stick taps Peter Mrazek.
Understandably so, Johnny. I'm going to go with the forward position, and it's not what everybody thinks I'm going to say. Big stick taps to a guy like Philip Kurashev, showing that he is not just a defensive forward, and there's more to his game than I think what a lot of people anticipated coming into this season. Obviously, when it was coming into the year, nobody knew what was going to happen, and he became, Bedard's kind of wingman there on the top line for a large portion of the season. But he's got one more year at about $2.2 million, 54 points in 75 games, just came up short of that 20-goal threshold. I think he gets there next year. 18 goals, 36 assists from Phil Kurashev. So hell of a season for him. And honestly, I think he's written himself into what this immediate future of this Blackhawks teams look like when they start to compete. And so with that in mind, stick taps to Philip Kurashev and stick taps to the kid, because if he does this again next year, he's going to have a really nice payday on the other side of it as well.
I've got a couple of stick taps. Number one goes to Tony, the beer vendor, right outside 325, Johnny. I know he was your guy for many seasons, and I feel like I sort of adopted him as my favorite beer tender at the UC as well. Hooked me up a couple of times with some beers, and just an excellent guy to visit in between intermission. So if you're up in the UC 300 level, go say hi to Tony. Tell him Four Feathers Podcast sent you. He probably won't know what that is. Maybe you will. I don't know. But stick taps to him. Second stick taps go to, hey, how are you now, Jason Dickinson? I thought he had a fucking wonderful season for the Chicago Blackhawks. Got to be there in person as you were as well, Ron Luce, for that hat trick. Really established himself this year as a leader, a fan favorite in Chicago here for the Blackhawks. So those are my stick taps.
Yep, I love it, guys. It's been a fun ride this season. So we close it down by taking a look at what's on tap next. Ice Hogs are in the Calder Cup playoffs. That best of 5 series against the Grand Rapids Griffins will begin Saturday. Other than that, NHL Draft Lottery. Find out exactly where the Blackhawks are picking. Remember to be kind to your ping pong balls between now and then. No date set right now, but it is likely May 6th or 7th. Other than that, NHL awards will be in late June. In the NHL draft is June 28th and 29th. On the awards, just real quick, Colin Blackwell nominated for the Masterton Trophy, and Connor Murphy is nominated for the King Clancy Trophy. Other than that, you'll see a few guys play over in IHF Worlds, Connor Bedard being one of them. Seth Jones, Alex Vlasic on the USA side. Lukas Reichel will be down in Rockford for those Calder Cup playoffs. And fun note that just came out of light yesterday, Connor Bedard was mentioned, just name dropped, didn't actually appear in it, but mentioned in the Shoresy season 3 trailer. So I thought that was pretty hilarious. If you want to go watch that, I got a post written up over at ontapsportsnet.com about it. So that's all I've got from this one, guys. Final thoughts.
And then Johnny, with the final note on the what's on tap next, it's Christmas morning on July 1st when NHL free agency opens, and I can't wait.
Yep.
You're going to be so happy. You're going to be so happy on that day, Ron.
So happy.
Johnny, final thoughts. It was a great season. I enjoyed watching Blackhawks hockey this year. A lot of that is because they, got Connor Bedard in the lottery, in the draft. This could have been a whole lot worse, I think, for all of us sitting here right now, had that ping pong ball not fallen in the Chicago Blackhawks' favor. So when Johnny says, be kind to your ping pong balls, he means it. This matters in our happiness here on a day-to-day basis as we go through the Chicago winners and need something like the Chicago Blackhawks to keep our minds off of minus 10-degree temperatures and trying to trudge through everything we have to do in Chicago. And so be nice, be kind to your ping pong balls. Johnny, close it out.
Yep. Guys, appreciate everybody tuning in to the Chicago Blackhawks 2023-24 season eulogy here at Four Feathers Pod. Stay tuned with us over on the socials at Four Feathers Pod and at OnTap Sportsnet for more Blackhawks and hockey content all off season. And OnTapSportsNet.com is the place to go for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. Make sure you're subscribed over on YouTube at OnTap Sportsnet so you don't miss a show when we go live. GM Ron season has begun, gentlemen. Until next time, let's go Hawks.
Let's go Hawks.
Let's go Hawks, baby.